Daniel Cole walked into Harlow's with one goal: get through dinner, make his best friend happy, and go home to his daughter. He wasn't expecting anything. Not conversation, not chemistry, not whatever it was that Brett seemed convinced he needed after 3 years of frozen dinners and bedtime stories. But when the woman at table 7 looked up from her menu, the smile on her lips stopped him cold in the middle of the room. It belonged to someone he recognized, someone he had no right to be surprised by, because the person responsible for hurting her 10 years ago, without fully understanding what he was doing, had been him. Before he could process a single thought, she spoke first, saying his name in a voice so even and unhurried, it felt less like a greeting and more like a door being opened. She already knew he was coming, so who had arranged this? And after 10 years of silence, what exactly did Clare Ashford want? Daniel Cole had a routine, and he protected it, the way other men protected their retirement accounts. Weekdays up at 6, make Lily's lunch, drop her at Riverside Elementary by 8, drive 40 minutes to the Hargrove and Associates office in downtown Chicago, spend the day reviewing structural load calculations and pretending he wasn't the youngest-looking 40-year-old in the building. Pick Lily, up by 5:30, make dinner, help with homework, read one chapter of whatever book she was currently obsessed with, lights out by 9. Weekends were slightly looser pancakes on Saturday, laundry on Sunday, and one activity chosen entirely by Lily, which lately meant a lot of trips to the Natural History Museum and way too much time staring at dinosaur bones. It was not a glamorous life. Daniel knew that. But it was steady, and steady was what he had built after everything fell apart, and he was not about to let Brett Walker talk him into disrupting it for a blind date. Brett had been trying for the better part of a year. He would bring it up casually, the way someone slips a pill into a dog's food disguised inside normal conversation. My neighbor's sister just moved to the city. You remember Gail from accounting. She mentioned her friend. There's this woman in my kickboxing class. Daniel, she's great. She makes her own pasta. Daniel had deflected every single one with the practiced ease of a man who had become genuinely comfortable saying no. He was not opposed to meeting people in theory. He just didn't see the point in theory becoming practice. His last attempt at a relationship 3 years ago had lasted 4 months and ended when the woman in question realized that his daughter would always come first, and she had been hoping that was just something divorced dad said. It wasn't, so Daniel had quietly stopped trying, and he thought Brett had finally accepted that. Right up until the Tuesday afternoon, Brett appeared in the doorway of his office, holding 2 coffees and wearing the particular expression of a man who was about to ask for something he knew he shouldn't. "Just one dinner," Brett said. "That's all I'm asking. Harlow's Friday at 7. The reservation's already made." Daniel looked at him over the rim of his reading glasses. Brett set the coffee on the desk. "She's not some setup. Okay, she's someone I met at a work event. She's smart, she's funny. She specifically said she doesn't want anything complicated." Daniel picked up the coffee. He knew from long experience that Brett's version of not complicated had a remarkably wide margin of error. But there was something in the way Brett said it, a little too casual, a little too rehearsed, that made Daniel look at him more carefully. Brett met his eyes and didn't flinch, which meant he believed what he was saying. So Daniel said, "Yes, the way you say yes, to things you're already 90% sure you'll regret," and went back to his load calculations. Friday came the way Fridays always did, too fast. Daniel dropped Lily at her grandmother's place, changed his shirt twice, and drove to Harlow's with the radio off because he needed the quiet to talk himself into actually walking through the door. The restaurant was the kind of place that had warm lighting on purpose and menus without prices, which meant Brett had either spent real money on this reservation or called in a favor. The hostess led him through the dining room toward a corner table, and Daniel was already composing a polite opening line in his head, something easy, something that left room for a quick exit if needed, when the woman at the table looked up. The smile on her face arrived before any other expression could, and Daniel stopped. He knew that smile. He had seen it across a dining hall table in college, across the hood of a car, in the rain, across 100 ordinary moments that had accumulated without his noticing into something he hadn't understood the weight of until it was too late to matter. Clare Ashford looked the way 10 years of living. Well looked on a person, a little sharper, a little steadier, not harder exactly, but more certain of herself in the way that people become when they've stopped needing other people's approval to feel solid. She was watching him the way someone watches a door they've been waiting in front of. For a while, patient, prepared, and not entirely surprised that it finally opened. "Daniel," she said, and his name in her mouth sounded exactly the way it had always sounded, like she'd had it ready. He stood there for what was probably 2 seconds and felt like 2 minutes. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, because walking out would have required knowing why, and he didn't know yet. Clare picked up her water glass. The candlelight made the table look like a still from a movie neither of them had agreed to be in. "You knew," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Clare nodded once without drama. "Brett and I work in the same industry. We met at a conference back in September. When he mentioned he was trying to set up a friend, I asked who." She set the glass down. "I asked him to arrange it." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, trying to read the angle, the agenda, the injury, the ask, and coming up empty. "Why, what?" he said. Clare unfolded her napkin and laid it across her lap with the calm of someone who had rehearsed less than he expected. "Because the last time I saw you," she said, "I was 22, and I was crying in a parking lot. I figured we could do better than that." The waiter came before Daniel could respond, and he spent the ordering process grateful for the interruption. He asked for whatever the fish was and a glass of water, because he wanted to keep his head clear, and Clare ordered the duck without looking at the menu, which told him she'd been here before. When the waiter left, the silence between them settled in the particular way that silences settle between people who once knew each other well, not uncomfortable, but aware of itself. Daniel turned his water glass in a slow circle. He had thought about Clare Ashford over the years, the way you think about people you wronged without intending to, briefly, uncomfortably, and then put away again. He had been 23, finishing his senior year, and he had been so certain that what he felt for Rebecca was the real thing that he hadn't looked closely enough at what he was walking away from. 10 years of hindsight had the clarity of a photograph developed too late. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said. It came out quieter than he intended. Clare looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "That was never the part I was angry about." Dinner passed in a way Daniel hadn't expected, not tense, not performative, but something in between conversation and negotiation. Clare told him about her work. She ran the creative division at Hartfield Media, a mid-size firm that handled brand campaigns for national clients. She had moved to Chicago 2 years ago from Boston, where she had spent most of her 30s building something from nothing, which was a sentence she delivered without any flourish, at all the way people describe things that cost them a great deal, and they're not interested in making dramatic. Daniel talked about Lily carefully at first, then less carefully, because talking about Lily always made him less careful. He mentioned the Dinosaur Museum. He mentioned the book she was currently reading, which was about a girl who discovers her grandmother is secretly a famous cartoonist. Clare laughed at the right moments and didn't push at the edges of what he wasn't saying, which was the thing that made him realize she had changed the most. She had learned patience. The girl he had known in college had wanted to understand everything immediately. This woman was willing to wait. At 8:45, his phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen and felt the familiar lurch of a parent's stomach. Riverside Elementary, Mrs. Calloway's number. He picked up before the second ring. Lily had a fever. She'd been complaining of a stomachache since lunch. His mother-in-law had already been called but couldn't reach her phone. Daniel was on his feet before the call ended, jacket in hand, apology forming on his lips. Claire was already signaling the waiter for the check. "I'm coming with you," she said. Daniel stopped. "You don't have to do that." Claire looked at him in the mild, slightly amused way of someone who has already decided. "The reservation was under my name," she said. "I'll settle the check. My car's out front. I know a faster route." Daniel looked at her for a moment, and then, because there was no good argument against efficiency when his daughter was sick, he said fine. The drive to the school took 11 minutes. Claire drove the way she talked, without wasted motion, decisive at intersections, quiet in a way that left room for Daniel's thoughts. When they pulled up outside the school's side entrance and saw Lily sitting on the bench outside the nurse's office, wrapped in a borrowed cardigan, 3 sizes too big, clutching her backpack like a small anchor, Daniel felt the tight thing in his chest release the way it always did when he could see she was okay. He went to her first. He crouched down and put his palm to her forehead and asked how she was feeling in the low, steady voice he used when he wanted her to know. He wasn't alarmed, even when he was slightly alarmed. Lily pressed her face against his shoulder and then looked up past him, suddenly aware of someone else standing at a careful distance near the parking lot. "Who is that?" she said. Daniel started to answer. Lily, being 7 and constitutionally unable to wait for an explanation, called out, "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" Claire walked over without hesitating, crouched down to Lily's level, and met her eyes with the directness of someone who has decided not to be condescending to small people. "Not yet," she said, "but I'm working on it." Lily considered this with the gravity of a small person, evaluating important information. Then she looked at Daniel. "She seems honest," she said. Daniel looked at Claire over the top of Lily's head. Claire looked back at him, and for the first time all evening, her expression held something she hadn't planned. He drove Lily home in his own car. Claire followed, and when Lily asked from the back seat if the lady was coming inside, Daniel said yes before he'd quite decided to. He gave Lily half a children's Tylenol and a glass of water with ice the way she liked it, and by the time he had her settled on the couch with the blanket that lived specifically on the couch for sick occasions, Lily was already losing her fight against sleep. Claire had stayed in the kitchen leaning against the counter, giving them space. When Daniel came back in, she had made tea, found the bags in the cabinet above the sink, without asking filled 2 mugs, and set them on the counter with the practicality of someone who had grown up in a house where you made yourself useful or you made yourself scarce. "You didn't have to do all this," Daniel said. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug. "I know." Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen window. 10 years is a long time to keep a person in a parking lot, she said. Daniel looked down at his tea. He didn't say anything because he didn't have anything that was adequate, and Claire didn't seem to need him to. She finished her tea, collected her coat from the back of the chair, and said goodnight in a tone that expected nothing and left the door open for everything. He thought about her for a week. He thought about her while reviewing blueprints, and while making Lily's lunch, and while pretending to watch television at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday. He didn't call because he didn't know what to say yet, and because the thing sitting in his chest when he thought about that kitchen conversation was complicated in a way that required more time than he was giving it. He had not felt that kind of complicated in a very long time. Then Brett appeared in his office doorway again, this time without coffee, and said, "She texted me. She wants to know if she scared you off." Daniel looked up. "She didn't scare me off." Brett nodded with the particular satisfaction of a man whose plan is working. "Then call her," he said, and left before Daniel could argue. He called. They had coffee on a Sunday, while Lily was at a birthday party, and then dinner the following Thursday, and then a Saturday, where Claire happened to know about a natural history museum exhibit on prehistoric marine life that Lily had been asking about. And somehow, all 3 of them ended up in front of a 12-foot mosasaur replica, while Lily delivered a detailed lecture on why the mosasaur could almost certainly defeat a megalodon. Claire listened to the entire lecture. She asked 2 follow-up questions. Lily, who had the social instincts of someone twice her age, declared afterward in the car that Claire was actually pretty good. Daniel caught Claire's expression in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, but her shoulders had dropped about an inch, and the line around her mouth had softened in the way that people's faces soften when something they've been quietly hoping for turns out to be true. He made a note of it. There was a particular rhythm developing between them, easy in the way that things are easy when they have a long history underneath, not effortless, but familiar. Claire had a dry, quiet sense of humor that surfaced most reliably when things were slightly awkward, which Daniel found reassuring in a way he couldn't fully explain. She was decisive without being rigid, and she had the rare quality of genuinely meaning it when she said something was fine. In college, he had been too young and too certain about Rebecca to see any of that clearly. He was seeing it now with the uncomfortable clarity of a man who understands exactly what his 23-year-old self had failed to appreciate, which is a specific kind of emotional debt that pays interest over time. He didn't say any of this out loud. He showed it in smaller ways by remembering her coffee order and having it ready by not checking his phone when they were talking, by the particular attention he gave to what she said in the spaces between what she was actually saying. Claire noticed. He could tell she noticed because she was the kind of person who paid attention to what wasn't being said, and she received his quieter gestures the way you receive something you've been given graciously without making a production of it. 3 weeks in, things were going well, in the careful provisional way that things go well when both people involved have been hurt before and are paying close attention. Claire never pushed. Daniel never overcorrected. Lily accepted the new variable in their routine with the adaptability of children who have learned that their father's steadiness is the constant, not the specific arrangement of people around it. It was not dramatic. It was in fact rather ordinary in the best possible sense, the kind of ordinary that feels like something being repaired. And then Rebecca came back. She appeared on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Not a weekend, not a holiday. Just an ordinary Tuesday in March, gray and cold, a day designed for nothing more than lunch at a desk and a 7 o'clock bedtime. Daniel came home to find a letter from a family law attorney in the mailbox. Rebecca Cole, formerly. Rebecca Hartwell was petitioning for partial custody of Lily Annette Cole, age 7. He stood in the front hallway, holding the letter for a long time. Lily was still at his mother's. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet, when the thing you've been afraid of has finally arrived, and there's no more need to brace. Daniel set the letter on the counter and called his attorney. Rebecca had left when Lily was 18 months old. She had not contested. The divorce had not asked for custody, had not maintained contact. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas call, not a single message in 5.5 years. Daniel had built an explanation for Lily that was honest in the proportions a 7-year-old could carry her mom, and I couldn't make it work. She isn't in our life right now. That is not because of anything you did. People are complicated. Lily had accepted this with the same gravity she accepted most things seriously. For about 2 days, then moved on, but this letter meant she would have to carry something new, and Daniel's first clear thought, standing alone in his kitchen, was that he was not going to let that happen without a fight. His second thought was that he was angrier than he had allowed himself to be in a very long time. He set the letter on the counter and stood with both hands flat on the surface and made himself breathe steadily until the anger settled into something he could work with. His attorney, Patricia Strand, was methodical and unbothered by things that would unsettle other people, which was exactly what Daniel needed. She reviewed the letter on a Thursday morning and told him the petition was thin. Rebecca had no documented history of involvement, no stable residence on record, and no demonstrated grounds for modification. That doesn't mean it goes nowhere, Patricia said. Courts want biological parents in children's lives when it's feasible. We need to show it isn't. She asked for documentation, school records, medical history, financial records, a log of Rebecca's contact or absence thereof. Daniel had kept all of it. He had kept it without knowing why only that instinct had told him not to throw away anything that might one day need to account for itself. He went home that evening and pulled the folder from the back of the filing cabinet, and sitting at the kitchen table while Lily slept, he organized 5.5 years of evidence that a child had been cared for, and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who has been preparing for something he hoped would never come. 2 days later, he got a message from a colleague at the firm, a screenshot of an internal email thread copied without comment, with a single line highlighted. Someone had flagged a potential conflict of interest to senior management. Daniel Cole was in a personal relationship with Clare Ashford, whose company Hartfield Media had recently signed a consulting contract with Hargrove and Associates. The implication was that the relationship had preceded the business arrangement and may have influenced the procurement decision. Daniel stared at the screen. He read it twice, then a third time. The contract had been finalized in December. He and Clare had met officially in February. The timeline was clear. But timelines didn't matter much once an allegation was in circulation. By the end of the week, he was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. He sat in his car in the firm's parking garage that evening and thought through the arithmetic of everything he stood to lose. His position, which he had rebuilt from 2 years of freelance work after the divorce, left him financially restarted. The custody hearing which his attorney had warned could be influenced by anything that made him appear unstable or distracted, and Clare, who had walked back into his life through a door he hadn't known he'd left open, and whose presence was already woven into the daily fabric he and Lily had spent 3 years carefully making. He thought about the timing of Rebecca's reappearance. He thought about who, aside from Brett, knew about the blind date before it happened. He thought about the screenshot and who had sent it and why. He drove to Claire's apartment. She buzzed him up without asking who it was, which meant she had been expecting him. Her apartment was the kind of place that looked casual, but had been put together with real intention. Bookshelves with actual books in actual order. A kitchen with equipment that was used, a couch that faced a window instead of a television. She was standing by the kitchen island when he came in, and she read his face the way she had learned to read him over the past weeks, not defensively, but with the concentration of someone paying close attention to something that matters. Daniel set his phone on the counter, the screenshot visible. He watched her look at it. Her expression didn't change the way a guilty person's expression changes. It changed the way a prepared person's expression changes, which was a different thing, and he registered that difference even through the anger. "Did you know about Rebecca?" he said. Clare looked up from the phone. "I knew she had contacted an attorney," she said. "Brett mentioned it after the custody letter was filed. Someone he knew had run into her." Daniel looked at her. "When 3 weeks ago," Clare said, "before the letter was delivered." The answer landed the way answers land, when they're true but still complicated. Daniel looked at the counter. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't have anything confirmed," Clare said, "and I was looking into it." He looked up. "Looking into it," he repeated. Clare held his gaze. "I wasn't going to let something I could see coming knock you sideways without trying to do something about it first." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck made a left turn too fast. "And the contract," Daniel said. "The consulting arrangement with my firm." Claire's jaw tightened slightly. Not guilt, he thought, but the expression of someone who had known this accusation was coming and is still, despite being prepared, tired of it. "The contract was in procurement before we had coffee," she said. "The timeline is documented. Your firm will confirm it in the review." She paused. "Someone is trying to muddy things, Daniel. The screenshot, the timing of Rebecca's petition, this isn't coincidence." Daniel stared at her. Something in him wanted badly to believe her. Something else was calculating the risk of believing the wrong person again at this particular moment, when the stakes were Lily. He said the things he regretted. Later, not dramatic things, not cruel things, just careful shutdown things. The kind a person says when they're trying not to get hurt and they're getting hurt anyway. He told her it was a lot to take in. He told her he needed some space to think. He watched her face settle into something neutral and careful, and he turned and walked out before he could see what came after the neutral. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-April. Daniel's attorney, a careful woman named Patricia Strand, had spent 3 weeks building their case, documenting Daniel's role as primary caregiver, Lily's school records, his financial stability, his support network. It was a strong case on paper. But Rebecca's attorney was arguing that Lily deserved the opportunity to know her mother, and family court judges were not, in Patricia's careful estimation, predictable about that particular argument. 2 days before the hearing, Daniel had dinner alone at his kitchen table, while Lily slept down the hall, and he turned over everything in his head until none of it was in the right order anymore. He had not spoken to Clare in 9 days. He had not told Brett what had happened, because he didn't know what to say. He loaded the dishwasher and went to bed, and stared at the ceiling until 2 in the morning. The next morning, Brett showed up at 7 with bagels. He sat down at the kitchen table, unwrapped his bagel, and pushed a manila envelope across the surface without ceremony. "She asked me to give you this," he said. "She didn't want to send it directly in case you didn't want to hear from her." Daniel looked at the envelope. Brett ate his bagel and said nothing else, which was how Daniel knew it was serious. He opened it. Inside was a collection of documents tabbed and organized with the precision of someone who had spent time on this printed bank. Records, a court filing from 3 years prior in Cook County, a letter from a family attorney in Nevada, and a handwritten note on plain paper at the front. He read the note first. It was short and addressed not to him, but to Patricia Strand, with Clare's direct contact information at the top. It offered her testimony as a character witness and as a provider of the accompanying documentation. It outlined what the documents contained. At the bottom, in Clare's handwriting, one sentence: "I'm not asking him to trust me. I'm asking you to use what's useful." The bank records showed a pattern of withdrawals and gambling losses tied to Rebecca's accounts across a 2-year period ending in the same month she had filed for divorce. The Nevada attorney's letter was a summary of a prior legal matter, unpaid debts, a civil judgment, a forwarding address that had changed 4 times in 3 years. It was not flattering. More importantly, it was admissible. Patricia Strand spent 20 minutes on the phone with Clare the afternoon before the hearing and called Daniel afterward. "She did this without you asking," Patricia said. "She knew you might not use it. She did it anyway." Daniel sat on the back porch steps while Lily played in the yard, watching his daughter crouch over something in the grass, a worm. Probably she had been interested in worms lately, and felt the slow, clarifying ache of having misjudged something important. He had walked out of Clare's apartment not because he believed she was lying. He understood now. He had walked out because he was scared. That was not a small difference. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Rebecca's attorney made the expected arguments. Patricia presented the documentation, which Rebecca did not have the standing to contest and did not try to. By noon, the judge had declined Rebecca's petition for custody, citing insufficient demonstration of stability or sustained parental intent. Rebecca and her attorney left without making eye contact. Daniel stood outside the courthouse in the April cold, a clear sky overhead, the sound of Michigan Avenue traffic moving at its usual indifferent pace, and felt the held breath of the last 3 weeks finally release. He called Patricia and thanked her. He called his mother and told her to let Lily have a cookie. Then he sat on a bench outside the courthouse for a few minutes, watching people come and go through the glass doors with their folders and briefcases and the particular compressed energy of people navigating legal machinery. And he thought about what Patricia had said on the phone. She did it without you asking. She knew you might not use it. She did it anyway. He turned that over in his mind and arrived at the same place he had been arriving at for the past 9 days, which was that he had responded to Claire's honesty by making it about his own fear. And he had dressed the fear up as reasonable caution, and there was a meaningful difference between those two things that he owed her the dignity of acknowledging out loud. He stood up and flagged a cab. He had a daughter to pick up first, and then he had something to say. He went to Hartfield Media's offices. The receptionist told him Clare was in a meeting. He said he would wait, and he sat in the lobby for 45 minutes, which gave him time to think through what he wanted to say, and arrive at the conclusion that the most honest version was also the simplest one. The lobby was clean and well lit, and had the faint smell of good coffee and climate control. There was a stack of design publications on the side table that he looked at without reading. There were 2 other people waiting, a man in a charcoal suit scrolling his phone, and a younger woman reviewing a printed deck with the focused expression of someone running lines before a performance. Daniel sat with his elbows on his knees and thought about a 22-year-old woman in a parking lot and a 32-year-old woman driving 11 minutes without wasted motion to get to a sick kid, and a 33-year-old woman sitting alone in an apartment building a file that she might never get to use. He thought about what it looked like when someone decided to love a person carefully without requiring anything back. He was still thinking about it when Clare came through the glass doors. Then she came over and sat down in the chair across from him, the way she had sat across from him at Harlow's. No performance, no armor. He put the manila envelope on the table between them. "I didn't ask you to do this," he said. Clare nodded. "I know." "You did it anyway." "Yes." Daniel looked at the envelope. "I walked out without hearing you out," he said. "I know what that felt like, and I'm sorry." Clare was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cab pulled up and discharged a woman in a yellow coat who disappeared through the revolving door. "I knew you'd come back when you were ready," Clare said. Daniel looked up. "How?" She considered him with an expression that was almost amused. "Because you came back tonight, and you're not the kind of person who lets a debt go unpaid." He shook his head slowly. "That's not why I came back." Clare held his gaze. The lobby was quiet, except for the distant sound of elevator doors. "No," she said after a moment. "I didn't think so either." The firm's internal review concluded 2 weeks later. The procurement timeline was documented clearly enough that the conflict of interest allegation dissolved on examination. Daniel returned to work on a Monday and spent the first day catching up on a structural assessment that had sat on his desk since March. He had lunch at his desk and texted Lily a picture of a sandwich shaped accidentally like a triangle, which she declared geometrically interesting. It was a normal day. The particular relief of a normal day, after weeks of things being abnormal, was something he felt in his shoulders and his jaw, and in the specific way he drove home without clenching the steering wheel. On a Saturday in May, Clare came over for breakfast. Lily had requested pancakes, which was her standard opening move whenever she wanted something to feel like an occasion, and Daniel made them with the small cast-iron pan that had belonged to his grandmother, the one that required careful handling, and produced in return pancakes with a faintly crisp edge that no other pan could replicate. Clare arrived at the door with strawberries because she had remembered from something Lily had said 3 weeks earlier, in passing, that Lily preferred strawberries to blueberries in pancakes. Lily opened the door, saw the strawberries, and said, "You remembered." Clare said, "You mentioned it." Lily looked at her with the solemn final assessment of a small person who has been evaluating something for a long time and is now ready to conclude. Then she took the strawberries and ran back to the kitchen, and Daniel, leaning in the doorway, watched the whole transaction and thought about the particular arithmetic of small, accurate gestures and what they added up to over time. He poured a third cup of coffee and set it on the counter. Clare pulled up the stool across from him. Outside, the neighborhood was doing what Chicago neighborhoods do on Saturday mornings, in May, tentatively warmly, with the specific optimism of people who have just survived another winter. Lily narrated something from the table about the correct ratio of strawberries to batter a matter she treated with the authority of someone who had been eating pancakes for 7 years and therefore knew things. Clare listened with the attentiveness she always gave to things that mattered to Lily, and offered a counter-theory about the batter-to-strawberry ratio that Lily immediately challenged, and then, after 30 seconds of consideration, partially conceded. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup and coffee, and the windows had fogged slightly at the edges from the heat of the stove, and outside, a neighbor was mowing a lawn for the first time this season, with the tentative optimism of someone who isn't sure winter is really done. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there in his own kitchen on an ordinary Saturday and let it be exactly what it was. Sometimes the most important things don't arrive as dramatic moments. They arrive as a morning that feels, for the first time in a long time, like it's going in the right direction. He picked up his coffee. Clare caught his eye over the rim of her mug and smiled the same smile she had given him across the table at Harlow's, except this time he understood what it meant. And this time he was not standing in the middle of the room deciding whether to stay. He was already home,